Miss your old familiar friends, but waiting just around the bend. Everywhere you look, there's a heart, there's a heart.
Okay, we'll start with this. Well, some very welcome news in regards to the women's super middleweight division, a division that hasn't really been getting much attention for itself. The action has been abysmal, and meaningful fights have been far and few ever since Claressa Shields left the weight class. Well, we've got a good one coming up. Apparently, a deal has been finalized that will see the WBA super middleweight champion Alicia Napoleon locking horns with Sweden's own IBF champion Cederoos. And this is just what the doctor ordered. This is what I have been advocating for a very long time. That the talent pool in the super middleweight division, it's not deep enough for the world champions to operate independently of each other. In order to make any kind of noise, get any kind of attention, they need each other. They need to be fighting each other. And that's what resonates here. That there are no other big names out there for the likes of Alicia Napoleon or Cederoos or Franchon Cruz, the only unified champion at the weight. There are no other names out there more important, more pivotal to the division than each other's. So ideally, they should all be fighting each other. And we're going to get to see that on the undercard of Shields versus Habazin. What do I think about this fight? Well, my preliminary thoughts are that between the two champions, Cederoos and Alicia Napoleon, I'd have to say that the edge in experience and the fighter who has faced the better overall quality of competition would have to be Alicia Napoleon. You know, both Alicia and Aline, they've got a common opponent in Femke Hermans, but the difference is when Alicia fought Femke was undefeated, whereas by the time Aline fought her, both Alicia and Claressa Shields had dished out professional losses to Hermans. I'd have to say that it's not by much, but comparatively, Alicia has fought better fighters. She fought Hermans, yeah, but she also fought Tori Nelson. She also fought Hannah Rankin. So, you know, she's got a slight edge here over Aline. And what's curious about this situation is that in spite of this being a unification match for what is the super middleweight division, this fight is actually intended to be a prelude to what could be Napoleon versus Shields. That's right. You see, right now, you know, Shields is making a move to the junior middleweight division. That's where this Habazin fight is supposed to be taking place, junior middleweight. And the basic idea was that, you know, Claressa Shields moving down to junior middleweight would bring her closer to Cecilia Brækhus. That way, Brækhus would only have to move up one weight class to have the fight. The problem there is Brækhus is now on the DAZN side of the street. And all the talk around town seems to be, you know, word around the campfire, is that, you know, Brækhus, they've got the wheels in motion to match Brækhus not against Shields, but against Katie Taylor. So that kind of puts the kibosh on all those talks of Brækhus versus Shields. So it's possible that, you know, this stint that Claressa's having in the junior middleweight division, it may be short-lived, and she may be returning to the middleweight division where Alicia Napoleon, provided that she's successful against Aline, would meet her to challenge her for what belts she holds there.
What's confusing about this entire situation is all the fluctuations in weight and what that's going to do to who the world titleists are. What do I mean by that? Well, look, in this Habazin fight, right? There's supposed to be 2 world titles on the line in that fight, 2 vacant titles. The vacant WBC at 154 and the vacant WBO at 154, right? So the winner of the fight is going to end up with those 2 world titles. But Claressa Shields is still in possession of all the titles at middleweight. So does that then mean that the middleweight versions of those 2 world titles will then become vacant
if she wins?
Because Shields will be in possession of the junior middleweight versions of those titles. And just as well, when it comes to Alicia Napoleon, if she unifies those 2 world titles, you know, the WBA that she's already got and the IBF that she could win from Cederoos, if she does that and then moves down to fight Claressa
and loses,
potentially loses the fight, does she then lose those world titles as well? You know, how's it break down? Because this really is lacking structure, all these fluctuations in weight, fighters going up and down for fights. It can be very confusing.
You're telling me?
At minimum, what we can deduce is that if Claressa Shields does win the WBC title, but she doesn't decide to stay there, at 154, the next girl in line to pick up that green belt is Patricia Bergoult. Patricia Bergoult, who just decisioned Hannah Rankin in a fight that was for the interim championship. She's in line, regardless of what happens, to either pick up that belt or get a shot at it. But it's looking like Shields, after this Habazin fight, is going to be going back up to middleweight. So in all likelihood, Patricia could see herself becoming a world champion. It's all very confusing.
Yeah, I'd say so.
But I'll tell you what the ideal scenario is, okay? Let's say that Alicia beats Aline Cederoos and unifies those two world titles, right?
Right.
And then let's say that after that, she moves down to 160 and fights Clarissa Shields.
Right.
If Alicia loses the fight, I don't think her status at 168 should be affected by the loss. I think that ideally, she should still remain a champion at 168.
Even if she loses at middleweight.
Even if she loses at 160. Now, if by some off chance she beats Clarissa Shields and wins all those belts, then and only then would it make sense for her status at 168 to be so rescinded, that those belts she was holding up there should then become vacant, because you can't hold world titles in two separate weight classes. You can't hold both the 160-pound version of the titles and the 168-pound version of the titles. Something very similar to what we saw when Erika Farias moved up in weight to fight Cecilia Brækhus. Erika moved up, she tried to challenge Cecilia for her belts, she lost the fight. But when she returned to 140, she was still the WBC champion there. That's more or less the kind of thing I'm implying, that even if Napoleon moves down and loses the fight, she shouldn't lose her belts at 168 because she didn't lose a fight at 168. She would have lost the fight at 160. Just one man's opinion, feel free to disagree. No, we might be getting a little bit too ahead of ourselves. For now, keep your eyes peeled for Alicia Napoleon, the WBA champion, versus Aline Cederoos, the IBF champion, on the undercard for Shields versus Habazin, going down on January 10th. Okay, and now it's time for our weekend picks. We've got a couple of fights coming up tomorrow night. One more interesting, one more intriguing than all the others. And that is the fight between Teofimo Lopez, the challenger, and Richard Commey, the champion. It's funny because in regards to this fight, the challengers actually got more of a buzz than the champion. But I'll say that, Richard Commey is not to be overlooked, especially in this fight, especially in this situation, especially in what is his defense of that IBF title. I don't think he's going to give it up without a fight. And whether or not he gives it up at all has yet to be determined. Understand something. Teofimo kind of talked himself into the spotlight.
He did.
He really has gotten himself a lot of attention. And it's not just because of those, highlight reel, fan-friendly KOs he gets. Because in all honesty, in the early stages of a fighter's career, a lot of guys rack up just those kinds of knockouts over just those kinds of opponents. In the very beginning, it's not uncommon for a young up-and-comer who wants to make a name for himself to rack up some highlight reel KOs. But if Teofimo Lopez has garnered himself a buzz, it's not just on the heels of those knockouts, it's his ring presence, his showmanship, his trash talk, and him actively calling out the likes of Vasyl Lomachenko, that in many ways, he's talked himself into the spotlight. And, at least for me, it created an air to where I'm not quite sure if this kid's ready for what he's asking for, if he really is ready to be under the hot lights. And the more I thought about this Richard Commey fight, the more I realized that I don't actually trust Teofimo Lopez in this situation, because I haven't seen enough of him. Up until very recently, Teofimo Lopez was a young fighter who was having things his way. This was a guy who, up until his last fight, had never gone past 6 rounds. And that denotes all the experience that he doesn't have. Masayoshi Nakatani, he took Teofimo the distance in a fight where Teofimo really didn't look his best. And I don't hold that against Teofimo Lopez because he's a young up-and-comer. He's not going to look perfect. It's just that this is a time-sensitive matter, that if this is how you're looking ahead of what is to be a Richard Commey fight, I can't trust that you've had the necessary experiences, that you can get it all together the night of the fight. And that's what I'm feeling right now. I'm feeling like, maybe Teofimo is better than advertised, and maybe he's ready for this situation, but up until this point, I really haven't seen it. Ergo, I can't trust him. You know that Teofimo Lopez is one of these young guys who comes out in that Philly shell guard with the left hand low, looking to roll punches off the shoulder and bring over a big right hand, whether it's up top or downstairs. But against Richard Commey, you have to wonder how much success Teofimo can have with that when, Richard Commey, he's a fastball pitcher. Whether he's firing straight shots from the outside coming in, or he's firing hooks, mid-range to inside. Either way, there's bad intentions, there's speed, there's power on every single shot. This is enough to fluster a young fighter who hasn't quite had the right experiences to prepare him for this. And looking at Teofimo's track record so far, his 14 professional contests, I have to say that I don't see anything in there semblant of the necessary preparation he would need for this kind of fight. I warn you that if you guys want to pick Teofimo Lopez on the premise of a gut feeling, by all means, go ahead. I understand. It's not like Richard Commey isn't without his flaws. He's got some drawbacks. A power puncher like Commey, who commits to his shots, opening up that way, it leaves you open for something to come back at you. And what does could be enough to put you out. There is that to consider. So if there are Lopez people out there who are picking him to win, I understand. But I'm gonna have to go with the reigning IBF champion Richard Commey to win this fight. In all honesty, it really does seem like the more logical choice the more I think about it. I think that a fight like this doesn't get viewed with the proper context because it's very easy to get swept up in the buzz of some young, undefeated, up-and-coming fighter who's charismatic. And you tend to overlook what other fighters are out there in the division and what they've done, what experiences they bring to the table. But Richard Commey is a guy who's locked horns with tough fighters like Denis Shafikov, like Ray Beltran. He's been in there with Robert Easter, and I know that Robert Easter's not the greatest, but he was a world champion at one point. And these experiences are what round out a guy like Richard Commey, who I would say is a more finished product and a more mature fighter, more or less, than Teofimo Lopez is here today. So I look at this situation, I think of the characteristics of Richard Commey, how this is a very aggressive, intense power puncher. The fact that he's got 29 professional victories and 26 of them came by way of knockout. It's safe to say that this guy's power is bankable. And this is a guy who's never been stopped. So, it's not a situation to where you can say that he's going to crumble off the first hard shot that lands for Teofimo. I see a situation to where Teofimo, this might be more than he can handle at this point in the juncture. So I am going with Richard Commey to win the fight. I am going with Richard Commey to retain the IBF title. And I realize that there's an opposing argument there that maybe Teofimo can hit him with something that he doesn't see, get some respect, maybe even get him out of there. I understand that. It's just that given how much experience Teofimo doesn't have, the logical choice in that situation would be to go with the guy
who's experienced,
who is more proven. And that guy, at least in this situation, is Richard Commey. This is the fight that it will take for Teofimo to make me a believer, to convince me. If he can prove me wrong, if he can pry that title away from Richard Commey, okay, now you're cooking with rice. But as it stands, I simply haven't seen enough from Teofimo Lopez to trust him in this situation. So I'm going with Richard Commey. We then come to what is the main event on that same card, the WBO welterweight contest between the reigning champion Terence Crawford and what is his mandatory challenger, Cederoos Kavaliauskas. And we already know what Crawford's capable of. We've already seen what he can do time and time again. The question is, how does that play out against Kavaliauskas and what kind of a fighter he is? Well, Kavaliauskas lives somewhere between a boxer-puncher and a pressure guy. He's not quite a pressure guy the likes of a Provodnikov, a Ivan Berenchik, a David Lemieux, to where they're just coming forward and relying on volume to get the job done. He does implement the boxing to get to the punching, but like any boxer-puncher, he is at a stylistic disadvantage against a pure boxer. And it just so happens that Terence Crawford has it well within his abilities to be that kind of a fighter. Terence Crawford's style, it lives somewhere between a pure boxer and a boxer puncher. This is a guy who can be a sniper. He can fight a long distance, outside kind of fight, picking his spots and taking his time. But when the situation calls for it, he can turn it up, mid-range to inside, and dog the other guy out. And the beauty of Terence Crawford is how he alternates between these two base styles, and he alternates between them seamlessly, just about as seamless as he alternates between being a right-handed fighter and a left-handed fighter. For Kavaliauskas, a guy who actually languished with the likes of a Ray Robinson, not to be confused with Sugar Ray Robinson, not that Ray, the other Ray. Ray Robinson, pure boxer. That's his base style. I wouldn't call him an A-level pure boxer or even a B+, but better still, that base style is enough that it gave Kavaliauskas problems. That suddenly the Mean Machine didn't seem so mean. He seemed to have been struggling to find his range against a moving target who's fighting from the outside behind his jab. And Ray doesn't have the mean streak that Terence Crawford does. Terence Crawford can fight that same kind of fight, but still pile up the points and inflict the damage. That's what distinguishes A levels from B levels and B levels from C levels. That you can use that style,
still be effective,
actually get the job done. So in this situation, I see that Kavaliauskas simply doesn't have the tools, or enough of them, for this job. That, like many Terence Crawford fights, this one's probably going to get off to a slow start as he's downloading information, figuring out his man, and sometime after the third, he's going to decide to kick it up a notch and start tagging Kavaliauskas with shots he doesn't anticipate, shots he doesn't see from angles he cannot defend himself from. And it's not that Kavaliauskas is a bad fighter, it's just that Terence Crawford is a great fighter, and there is a difference. For what it's worth, I think Kavaliauskas is a solid kid. I think it's going to take some doing. I think he's going to take the punches well, early. But after a while, it's going to wear him down, and in all likelihood, Terence Crawford, he'll get him out of there inside of, 10, 11 rounds. I think it's going to take some doing, given the condition of Kavaliauskas, but all the same, the smart money is on Terence Crawford to win, and not just win, but win by way of knockout. This isn't the kind of fight that leaves you with much to dwell on or much to reflect upon, because Terence Crawford has put forth so much already.